what this series of 2 adult eds is about, which is strengthening the foundation of our life together as a congregation by talking about some difficult issues. So, last week we talked about the fact that hopefully coming forward, not hopefully, it is. Going forward, we're going to have some discussions about what mission means in this congregation. We're also going to have, and that conversation is one yet to be framed, as is one about denominations. But what does it mean to be a union church, to be 2 denominations? And so we talked about last week the causes of conflict in a congregation or in an organization. I'm going to break the rule of public speaking that I was taught, which was I'm going to hand out the handouts. And I was taught that the first thing that happens is you lose everybody. But you know what? I trust. I love and I respect. And for efficacy's sake, I'm going to pass around causative conflict. If you heard it last week, you may have that, but I made some more. And then there's one called self-awareness inventory. That's one-sided. And then there's one called high-risk responses, active listening techniques. So take a peek at causative conflict. We did walk through these last week. It's difficult in any community setting, if you think about family or the workplace, friendships, but also church, to discuss, to confront conflict. But it's there. It's going to happen. We're sure more gathered, confusion will ensue. And that's what data issues, data-related conflict concerns. Lack of information, incorrect information, differing interpretations of information. If a question arises about anything in a church setting, we all come to the table perhaps with different understanding or different sets of data. Relationships, this is my favorite part because, again, I like working with couples and working with relationships. And I'm bullish that any relationship can, with good communication skills, have a chance to thrive. And so some of the things we talked about were poor communication, unskilled expression of emotion, which is a great euphemism for just being a jerk. Negative behavior, biases, stereotypes. Unresolved issues from the past. And so, especially in a church setting, we carry with us, I've been here 7 years, Gail's been here, actually you've been here many years, but there are issues that predate all of us that are informing the conversations we have today. So we're still working with kind of the way that the earlier church, this church, dealt with things in the past. It's in our DNA. So the beauty of that is how we now work on issues of conflict is going to have an influence on the generations to come. So I'll say more on that later. Structure. This is a little bit more difficult to deal with personally, on an individual level, by inadequate resources, inequitable power distribution, use of space and time, and ineffective procedures. And then finally, especially in an election year, values and interests as a cause of conflict. We see the billboards, we see the commercials, we have dinner with family, and immediately differing values come out, different ideologies, and that can be a source of conflict rather than just a source of appreciating diversity, because often it really cuts to the quick of something that's important to us, and sense. So let us bring us up to speed by ending with two things we talked about, or four things we talked about. Silo mentality, the idea that we have committees, we have groups, we have session, we have friendships within the church, and that we need to communicate beyond what's called silo mentality. And session alone can't do that. Even though it represents the church, people of the church, it is still its own silo in some regards. If people are not paying attention, if session is not communicating, then data is not being shared. People behaving in surprising ways. Another euphemism that we came up with this week for, wow, this is a church. I can't believe people act like that in a church. But it's actually, if you look at the family systems literature, it's not surprising. It's the church community mirrors our family communities. So that people are difficult in church is not something to be surprised by. It's something to notice, to say, yes, of course people appear at church and are difficult in this way or that, or are not as assertive as they could be, or whatever. They function much as they function in their family systems. And so there should be nothing surprising. Somebody said the other night when I was in class, they said, but you wouldn't know that, you're a pastor. and they were talking, I forgot what the issue was. And I was like, well, no, I mean, I would know about that because, you know, I'm a human being. You know, and power differentials, a big one. You know, do we honor the fact that all of us? This is what I like about the congregational system, which is how I define the structure of our church. I think I'm accurate in saying the Presbyterians and the UCC are alike, more or less. Is that we're on an even playing field. It isn't a top-down organization. Pastors don't tell the congregation. Session doesn't tell people who are not on session. There is no, it's a flat playing field, ideally. Perception is different because depending on your background, if you came from a church where the pastor played an authoritative role, then you're going to look at the pastor and say, well, in this church, you know, just instinctively. Or if you look at people who are in session as somehow the elite, because when you were growing up, you remember church council meetings, like I do. You know, church council, boy, that was like, you know, the legislature when I was growing up. But now I see it, no, it's a gathering of congregation members and staff, and we all take our turn, cycling on and off and on again, and the committees likewise. And so, but power differentials, perception power differentials, and actual ones that may through personalities. So if you react poorly to somebody who's got a strong, pushy relationship, there's a power differential there. People who have more information, there's a power differential there. That's why, again, you know, we are trying with the website, with the Here and Now, with the bulletin, with the bulletin boards, with the blog for youth, you know, to get the information out to people. Information. And then finally, resource allocation. This will come into our discussion, I think, in both conversations, which is, we're a church that is blessed with more resources than a lot of other churches. I think there's a lack mentality sometimes because we're constantly thinking of, well, there's something that needs to be fixed building-wise, or do we have the best program here? Are we reaching out to so-and-so? Are we sending enough money to our denomination? Are we supporting enough nonprofit organizations? And I think one thing that I would ask this congregation to remember is that we are a really well-to-do congregation. Probably not a wise thing to say just before we start on the stewardship campaign, but I mean, our problems are fortunate people problems. We're talking about resource allocation. Last week, I think I mentioned, I've been part of a dying church. And if you've ever been part of a dying church, where literally it's closing down the shop, you'll know. I mean, this is a real comfortable place to be. It sometimes doesn't feel like it when you're having a tough day, though. In my opinion, difficult conversations can serve a twofold purpose, and this is, I want to get back to an earlier point. First, they can actually resolve an issue. And so, in my sermon last week, I talked about how in premarital therapy, premarital counseling, we would have what was called fight night, where they would bring a fight that the couple was having, and they would just put it out on the table, and we would talk about different ways of resolving it than what they've been doing. And really it was a procedural thing. It was to show them that they had within them the resources to process conflict better. I don't teach anything. All I do is just point that people, look, you can do that. You've done it before. Do it to this. And sometimes the problem would get resolved, sometimes not. The point wasn't to get the problem resolved. So, sometimes the problem gets resolved. But the other benefit is that it can strengthen a couple. It can strengthen an organization. If we, 5 years from now, look back and say, look at all we've been through together and did not shy away from. Imagine how closer this church will be. If instead of cutting and running, we've addressed things that have separated at times, imagine how much closer, how much stronger we'll be. And so, the opposite of that, of course, would be avoid conversation, and problems don't get resolved. Avoid conversations, and that closeness doesn't happen. We too quickly say, this isn't for me. I'm going to go someplace where everybody agrees with me. And if you ever find that place, send a postcard. And so these conversations need to be entered into with self-awareness. So that's kind of the focus of the handout. All right, and so the first one I'd like you to look at is, because we will frame the issues that we're going to discuss. You will have an awareness because we will have together framed the issues that we're going to discuss. Information, we will do our best as a community to make sure that everybody has access to the data, to the resources they need. But when we get to this center part here, and the structure, we are going to try and create a safe environment for a conversation. Values and ideologies. My dream for this church is that we can increase our diversity in many ways, but the primary way is that we can disagree on things. and live with each other. I've seen it happen in other communities where people are just in disagreement, but it doesn't split them. It's possible. So what then is within our control is relationships. And so the self-awareness inventory is a list of questions. Who am I in the context of conflict? So I'm trying to come up with a hypothetical off the top of my head that isn't going to trigger the actual issue. But let's say my brother-in-law's church got a endowment, what do you call it, a specific bequest for $100,000. All right, the church building was falling apart. The specific bequest was to for the upkeep of a model of the church that had been put outside. So what does that trigger you? You know, all sorts of things. Good Lord! I mean, it's a model of a church in a time when the community is being threatened by the fact that we got this building that's not going to attract new blood. It's not going to maintain people. It's going to put a drain on our resources that could be going out for all kinds of missional work, however we define mission, inside and outside the church. So as I say these things, hopefully I'm triggering in you a little bit of a recognition of a conflict you may be familiar with in your life in a church, much like ours. And I'd like you to just take a minute now and look at questions 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 8. 5 through 7 talk about life experience, life history, and I mentioned that earlier. And I think for the purposes of our conversation today, take this home with you. It's a great thing to dwell on and look at, and it's a very important question. But for today, because I'm going to open the floor for discussion, I'd like you to look at what useful skills, attitudes, resources do you bring to a conflict resolution. So I want you to brag on yourself a little bit. All right? How can I enhance these strengths? So you may have some strengths, but they come off all wrong. I'm thinking specifically of talking. My family always says that I talk 15 minutes longer than I actually should. And saying that everything was going good until 15 minutes before you actually stop. So if I have a strength of talking, but keep talking 15 minutes, that's why we're going to end 15 minutes early today. All right, then is it a strength? What do I bring to a conflict situation that can be less than useful? So then I'm going to ask you to kind of narc on yourself a little bit. But not in a way that's self-degrading. In a way, again, that's the word I've been using is just creative. I mean, self-awareness, this idea of discovering here's an area where I keep tripping myself up, I keep tripping other people up. To be aware of that is such a beautiful thing. I mean, it is the basis for change. For how can I work with these growth areas? How do I work this out? How do I change this? Next time I get really reactive, what do I do? Reactivity, I think a lot of people can relate to, which is, if you walk by and just say, by the way, you suck, I'm going to wait, and can I take a breath first? Or can I realize that was a compliment, or something? And then number 8, how can I care for myself in a conflict situation? This is an important one because as with any community you're a part of, family, workplace, church, you're going to burn out if you subject yourself to too much anxiety, too much pain, to too much work. is there a way that you can pace yourself or care for yourself? And I've also added a bonus question, 8A, which is, how can you care for others in a conflict situation? And so know the environment you're in. So be aware of yourself, but also be aware of the environment you're in. So if you're going into, a business meeting where people, that's how they talk, and that's how they interact, then that may work. If you're going in where there is, what brings us together, our commonality is our faith tradition, well, you know that there's going to be people that avoid conflict or even discussing things that get very nervous when voices are raised. Take that as meaning something other than what you meant it, a raised voice. And so I think there's also a little bit of other awareness that goes along with that. And so this is why I want to draw our attention next to high-risk responses. So these are, to talk about the issue of, somebody coming in with guns a-blazing. These are responses that are considered non-responsive, or they're non-listening responses. And it's just good to go through the list and see, A, do you model any of these? Maybe inadvertently. Especially inadvertently, I think, is where we're going to gain the most self-awareness. I mean, if we're purposely a bully, we know we're a bully. But if we don't realize that we come off as a know-it-all bully, and then also we go, oh, look at this. Sometimes I do order. I do moralize. I do try and beat people over the head with logical arguments. That's sending solutions. Saying to the person, I don't believe you are smart enough to figure out your struggle without my knowledge. And this is a common one. Here, evaluating. I tell you what I think rather than help you understand what you think. So this one, again, is, except for judging and name-calling, neither of which sit right with most people probably, but praising, we can even praise somebody, out of a conversation. It's and so it's making the other person a thing rather than entering into a conversation with them. And diagnosing. One of the lessons I learned was don't pathologize a person, because you dehumanize them and treat them as a thing, then you treat them as a diagnosis. And so if I say, I'm not going to, Kari is just mean. You know what I mean? Now I don't have to get into conversation with her. Why? She's that mean person. You know what I mean? That's name calling too. Well, that's not, if you really are mean. But, all right, so finally, avoiding. I'm uncomfortable with your feelings and don't know how to deal with what you're talking about. So reassuring or diverting. And this is, again, a place that, we can afford to go. We really can. Churches, families, friendships do just fine without ever having difficult conversations. But do they grow? Do they thrive? Is it the ideal? No. And so simply saying, let's agree to disagree is different than appreciating the diversity of a community. So, and I disagree on, let's say, the voter registration thing. I don't know. We've never talked about it, but let's say we do. If I'm avoiding it, or if she says, how about voter registration? And I'm like, oh, tinfoil. Then we haven't had a conversation. If we enter into it, That's going to be difficult if we disagree. Or it may be. Or it may be something where we get to a point where we just, if you ever have successfully disagreed with somebody, and if you've got a best friend, and I've got a best friend who disagrees with me on gay marriage, and to be able to, it's like a miracle has happened inside of me. Now, it has nothing to do with them. It's how am I able to, live with this? And that's, I think, the kind of miracles that we need to have happen in this congregation, is to understand that we're too complex. There's too many traits in each of us for us to all agree on everything. And if we all agree on everything, good chance we're a cult. So, all right. In the remaining time, I'm going to ask you to turn over to active listening techniques. Anybody who has been in school, a workplace, any kind of conference is probably dreading this because we've all learned how to do reflective listening, which was Chuck talks and I go, and then I close with, Chuck, what I heard you say was that you like snowboarding. But sometimes snowboarding frustrates you because there are too many young people snowboarding when it is actually a sport that people over 50 should be allowed to do alone. And that is frustrating to you. So again, that's very shallow. That's just aping to me, the other person. In fact, you can tune out when somebody's talking and just focus on the tonality and go to your happy place and then get a little bit of content and reflect it back, and then they'll correct you if you're wrong. This person's form gives us fleshes that out more. So there's a little bit of show that you're listening. There is a little bit of reflect back what you've heard, and that's very important, because if I say, Chuck, what I heard you say was, that you've been in prison for 20 years, and no, I was talking about snowboarding. then we're, okay, now we're having a conversation. And so I think that's one really important thing to do. Again, I see this, in the relationship thing, and this is twins language. Don't assume that you're having the same conversation. It may be, let's say we're talking about something like mission. Are we talking about money, or are we talking about money concerns, or are we talking about what our church stands for, a definitional issue? Are we talking about what the meaning of Christianity is? I mean, do you see how there could be, when we bring up mission, we could all be having different conversations. And so it's important that as we work with one another, we are at least identifying what conversations we're having. There are multiple conversations to be had about any given issue, I think. So 4 of them that I wanted to point out for our purposes, or 5, is if you look under clarifying, the importance of clarifying, to get more information to help the speaker see points of view. Mark talked about, coming into a discussion with an unequal amount of information. And so we have those of us who have access to information a duty to provide information. And so Session has, God bless him, started publishing something in the Here and Now. But we also have a responsibility to pursue information. The youth blog. I put the youth blog out there. I sent out a letter to all the parents. All information will be on the youth blog. And because it's the only common way of communicating, that I can find, unless you don't go on the internet. Because people, but I'm assuming people open their church mail, which some people don't. So right now, the information is out there. I am committed to once a week getting the information out there, but I'm also expecting people to go find that information, or at least open their email, because that information will come to them in their email. So we have a responsibility to pursue the information and to get that clarification. Restating, I covered that, I guess, with what I heard you say. I think that's really important. I think that, especially as we talk about things that are especially sensitive, to not assume we've understood what the other person has said. Summarizing, I like not leaving the scene of a conversation without a sense of, okay, here's what we discussed, here's where we stand, you and I, so when we pick up, this is where we'll go. And then finally, validating. I think that we need to remember that in addition to perpetuating this church, we're perpetuating it for a reason. We're perpetuating it to spread the gospel. Now, we can have a discussion about what the gospel is, but I simply define it as the love of God in various ways. And one of the ways we started with each other. And so, basic respect, which comes through self-awareness, is the way that we can begin with each other, and then have this church be a source of a model. It'd be nice if we were a model of here's how you have these discussions.